beginning to get on my nerves. Who are those guys?
All right, welcome. If you found our channel, you are probably familiar with the White Cloaks and what we do. This is a little bit different. This is a kind of short form, one of hopefully many shorts that we're planning on doing on lore and characterization in the books, as well as touching a little bit on the show. So I am Pips from the Discord as well as the subreddit, and I have with me Tryp, who is an active member of both the Discord and subreddit, been a long time reader. She's been on a couple of the long form rewatches, and we're hoping to have her back again in the future. She is a huge fan of the character Matt, and so I decided to bring her on as a sort of expert on everything about Matt, and we're going to have a discussion about probably one of my favorite characters in the books, and I think definitely hers. So I'll turn it over to you just after one thing, which is a shout out to everyone else who's involved in this process. So the other people who are involved with the rewatches, and then inspiration, other YouTube channels, and other content creators who are fighting the good fight to actually put a focus on the actual real lore, the real world building and story by Robert Jordan, and his real masterpiece of a work. And contextualizing what Amazon has done to it in terms of really just downgrading and destroying the quality of the work into something that is so much less than what, really Robert Jordan deserved. It's less about what we, the fans, deserve than what he and his work deserve. So, Tryp, I'll turn it over to you. Introduce yourself and say whatever you will, and we'll go straight into the content you have for us, and hopefully I can keep up.
Thanks, Pips. And actually, I think you gave me a really good, basic introduction. Yeah, Matt is definitely my favorite character out of the books. I think he's a fan favorite, just generally speaking. But Matt is just definitely my type of guy. I do want to say, thanks for asking me to do this, because while I was going through the research and pulling up some fan art and some quotes and different things like that, it really was just like falling in love with Matt all over again. So I really enjoyed that. So I did want to say thank you for that. And I also wanted to give a shout out to all of the fantastic artists that have created so much fan art out there. You'll see some of them as we go through this. So I just wanted to say thank you to them as well. So when it comes to Matt, so we know that, to me, his character arc kind of comes from two different angles. One is when we're first introduced to him, of course, he's more or less an innocent troublemaker, I guess, a lovable rogue, living in a very small village. And over time, over the series, he, of course, grows into becoming the Marshal General of the Band of the Red Hand, the Prince of the Ravens, one of the top 5 generals. So, in that respect, that's a tremendous arc. So, I think there's also another aspect of that, is that throughout the series, he is always fighting responsibility and authority. So in his village, I think he's kind of looked at as almost like maybe a shirker, because he is such a troublemaker. I mean, I think we all remember the incident with the badger in the bag and releasing it on the village green, right? But he may be a troublemaker, but there's nothing cruel in it. There's nothing bad in it. He just likes to have fun. So even though he's always kind of fighting against this fate and destiny that the wheel has set out for him, over time, it seems like he accepts that and fulfills his purpose and his destiny, even, if he still kind of chafes at it a little bit. But with everything that happens to him, I think it's so important that he still remains true to himself. So I think his core character that we meet at the very beginning in The Eye of the World is still his core character, even with all the changes he goes through. So to me, that's more or less his overall arc.
Okay, so really great points. I like some of the stuff you brought up there. But I do have a question for you. A lot is made, I think, of Robert Jordan using the unreliable narrator, and a lot of fans of the show like to hit on the idea of the unreliable narrator, and they like to bring that up in conversations about all sorts of aspects of the book that were deviated from in the show. I would say that I think that there are two characters that I think are probably the best examples of an unreliable narrator that we see of really anyone in the show, or in the books rather, or the show, however you want to look at it. And those two characters I think are Nynaeve and Matt. Nynaeve is, we'll say, conflicted about her true motives and how she really sees herself in the world. And I think Matt, the idea that he's this sort of reluctant hero and all this other stuff, I mean, there's some truth to it. I will say, yep, there is definitely some truth to it. But I also think that there's an aspect of Matt that is really just some, I would say, true humility. And so the reluctant hero thing is not just that he's actually a shirker and that he actually doesn't want to do things and he's chafing against the turning of the wheel. I think there's a part of it that he truly thinks that his part to play is so inconsequential, that he's not a hero, he's not a lord, he's not anything special. And so a lot of what we see as the reluctant hero is actually maybe just being very humble about the things that he sort of brings to the table. So given that we have staked out sort of different positions on this, what do you think of my read?
Well, actually, in a way, it's a different position, and yet in a way, it's not. And I think that's actually great. Well,
All right, guys. So Tryp is running
it's
for Congress. She's agreeing and disagreeing at the same
whatever,
time. All right, good,
whatever
good.
you.
We're off to a good
I
start.
This is very typical. So this is actually a really great lead-in and a great point, I think, into the next slide that we have. Okay, so this talks about, kind of gambler farm boy. He's a charmer and the reluctant hero, right? Just what you were talking about. So to me, a lot of this is based in the role models and friendships that Matt had and still has growing up, right? So you were talking about humility, and even though, granted, I'll admit it's not something I was specifically thinking about, but you do bring up a great point because I think he's learned that humility from his role models, right? So we have his parents, Abel and Natty, right? Well, in the books, they're kind, they're wholesome. Abel is on the village council. He's really good friends with Tam, who I think we can all agree is one of the most, awesome role models a person could have. He's a fine horse trader. He's skilled in the quarterstaff and the bow. And of course, living on a farm, being a horse trader, these are all skills and traits that are going to be passed down to not only Matt, but all three of the boys. Um, but I didn't think about humility, and I'll accept that. I think you are actually right on that, that a lot of it comes from what he's learned growing up, what he not only sees from his parents, but just from the village itself, with a few exceptions. You could even say Nynaeve. Nynaeve isn't per se really humble, but
No, I
she's
certainly
also
wouldn't say that.
but, she certainly has the work ethic,
Mhm.
right? Just some of those things that you're gonna pick up from, the people around you. And to me, all of those things are the glue that sustains him through the various ordeals that he goes through, because he goes through a lot, right?
Agreed.
And maybe one of the most important parts of his character and what lets him retain his true self, even with the memories of countless hundreds of, military leaders in his head. That's got to be really difficult. So, yeah, I think that all ties together. I actually really appreciate that point.
All right, so for those of you keeping score at home, that's 1 point for Pips, and I think we can move
Whatever.
on. No reason to offer sort of a rebuttal point. I think we just go straight into the next thing, and Pips is ahead by a nose. So let's go.
Okay, so now we've got Loyal Friend and Taviran. Um, so on this one, there's actually kind of several things here. What I wanted to do was kind of transition from Matt's overall arc and character into some of the things that he experiences throughout the story that, have an effect on his growth as a character, the different things that happen to him. And of course, these are going to be some of my favorite moments from the series with Matt, and I think the majority of them are also fan favorites as well. So, one very important thing to me was that in Shadar Logoth, Matt picks up the dagger, and then after that, he, of course, is fighting off the dagger's effects. And this is their whole little arc, where they're going from place to place, trying to find the others. So I just wanted to point out that here, I think something that's really important is the support that he shows Rand. And we know we don't really see this in the show at all. Um, Supporting him while he's fighting off the effects. And then as a
Yeah, if
really good
anything, we
friend,
really see Rand supporting Matt in the show. I think that's a good point to bring up that we don't see this aspect of their friendship.
right. And also the fact that, in the next book, of course, this is where he sounds the horn, and being Taviran has pulled him into that. So I just think it's a really important part of his arc and his character, what an actual loyal friend that he is. And something else that kind of ties into this, and I'll just kind of mention this really quickly, but the discussion we were just having, about how he does kind of push back against his destiny, being brought into things by the pattern. But when it comes down to it, he's capable, he's loyal to his friends, he gives 100%. And throughout the series, we see him accept this duty and responsibility, in the things like sacrificing his eye to rescue Moraine, rescuing the girls in Tyr, supporting Egwene when she's not treated as Amerlin. And I think you actually disagree with me on that one, but those are just some of the examples where I think he just steps up to the plate and does what needs to be done.
Yeah, I won't really disagree with you that much. I think a little fine detailed disagreements. My point was mainly that I think that Matt was right. He was like, you're not the Amerlin. This is silly. You're just being used." And he was right. I mean, she was also right in that the people who thought that they were going to use her were going to be sorely mistaken. But he was correct about what was happening, at least initially. So they're kind of both right. Um, but yeah, the Matt and Egwene relationship, I think, is one of the lesser sort of fleshed out relationships between the primary characters in the story. So it's hard to really make a compelling argument, I think, on their relationship.
Okay. So, one of the favorite things, I think this is another one of the running things in the series is, Matt and his not a bloody lord. So, I just wanted to touch on that real quick. And I thought that I'd also include another fan favorite that I think we all hope to see in the show, but we're probably not going to see in the show. And that, of course, is after the healing from the dagger, when he basically kicks Gawain and Galad's butts with the quarterstaff. We all love that. And then just a nice little quote that kind of really drives home his feelings about being a lord, even though he does grow used to a touch of lace later on.
Yeah, I would be shocked if we see this in the show. One, I mean, what they've done with Matt's character and kind of where he is locationally in the show, how it's sort of played out so far. The fact that we haven't even seen Gawain and Galad yet. I know that they are in season 2, so maybe they'll be there. Maybe it'll all happen. Who knows? There's also the idea that the story about the world's greatest swordsman getting defeated by a farmer with a quarterstaff was made into one of those little kind of animated shorts that Amazon put out along with the show.
Right.
And so far they haven't hit the same thing twice. They've never sort of hit a topic again if the short included it. So I wouldn't be super surprised if that's just that's the only look we get into that aspect of his character, or sort of generally into the world. Which is a shame. I think you're right. This is a great look at all 3 of their characters and their differences.
Well, and I have to say, I think even the people who really like the show are going to be exceedingly disappointed if they don't include that. I think we might see some reaction from that, which would actually be nice. But
You
okay.
mean if we don't see 3 hot sweaty young men swinging sticks at each other, that the fans of the show are going to be upset? I guess remains to be seen. Remains to be seen.
Well, and especially seeing the one, kick the other's butt. So, yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll move on from that. Okay. So now on to Son of Battles. And um, this I just wanted to kind of bring up again, another one of my favorite parts, but also about the bubble of evil in Tyr. I just wanted to include that simply because I just love that particular part where, just surprise, all of a sudden, his playing cards attack him. I just thought that was a great scene. And then we also visit Rui Dian. So a big part throughout his arc as well are the Finn, the foxes and the snakes. So, I absolutely love that scene. And the Finn just changed so much for him. And of course, this is where he picks up and I'm still going to screw up the pronunciation on this, Ashandarai. Okay. Which is signature even in all the fan art, that you see throughout this. I mean, that is basically now his signature weapon, but I just thought it was important to mention that. Also, along with one of, I think, the favorite quotes. I see that from a lot of people, and I think that's actually a good lesson for all of us, even in our own lives. It's a really good way to look at life, you know?
Yeah, I would say Matt, certainly, his luck and a lot of aspects of his character are not necessarily very relatable. Uh, but I think that there's a lot of people who look at Matt as probably the most relatable of the characters. To the extent that he doesn't really have magical powers. You can say that he's got the memories, which is certainly some sort of supernatural kind of thing going on, right? But at the end of the day, he's just a guy, making his way in the world, fighting a lot of pretty supernatural things, people, monsters, whatever. So I think a lot of parts of his character and his outlook and how he kind of gets through that situation of being sort of the only normal guy in a world filled with the supernatural is probably something a lot of people sort of relate to.
I agree.
That might be why he's such a popular character. I mean, he's got a great sense of humor, and he does have some really great lines, and he's pretty good that way. But I wouldn't be surprised if, to at least some point, if Matt's character was almost designed as a little bit of an audience insert, as something that, you know, we were supposed to see ourselves in a little bit, of the normal guy who's constantly bringing up the fact that the whole world's going mad around him, and he's the only person who seems to notice it and remember that, like, this stuff isn't normal.
Well, and Robert Jordan was definitely intelligent enough to do that,
For sure,
intentionally.
for sure.
Yeah. All right. So here we have reluctant role model. And why do I have a feeling that Pips is going to disagree with me one more time on this? But Oliver, I think, is also another favorite character of his own. But I felt it was a big part of Matt's growth. When kind of the band, he unofficially adopted Oliver, kind of became, I guess, the band mascot in a way. So yeah, I just had to throw this in there. Not only is that some fantastic fan art,
It is.
but yeah,
I will
and
say,
all
I think that the blade of the Ashendari, however you want to say it, I think the blade is supposed to be black, and the raven on it is supposed to be black, sort of barely visible, etched in. So they took some liberties, but to be honest, after watching the show, if we see something that looks a tenth that good, I would be
odd.
thrilled. To the point that I'm going to disagree with you. I'm just going to point out that he's not a reluctant role model. I think that he is an unaware role model.
Oh, the running joke, right?
Yes.
Like, where does Oliver get his attitude about, or
Where is he
how
learning
to
all those swear
deal with
words?
women? Well,
Where
no,
does he learn to treat women that way?
uh-huh. Which I think is adorable, quite honestly, but that would just be me and my, yeah,
It's a great running
old-fashioned
joke.
values or something. It
It's a great
is. It
running
is.
joke. It's endearing to his character that he clearly cares about the kid, and is always trying to, like, get people to sort of mentor him, and, you know, put him with people who he thinks are sort of respectable. But again, his humility, he doesn't recognize that, like, Oliver is obviously going to look up to him as the role model, regardless of who he tries to pass him off to, or who he tries to get to tutor him or whatever. Absolutely not. There is no way around the fact that Oliver's going to try and emulate him. And so the fact that he's surprised by that is also another nice little aspect about his character.
Well, and how fitting is it in all those aspects that Oliver is then the one who sounds the horn?
Oh yeah, I mean, it is funny that that Matt essentially saddles himself with himself. I mean, Oliver is, whether or not he would have been this way without Matt's influence, we can debate, but he ends up being, you know, just as much of a rascal and sort of a ne'er do well, if you want to call Matt that, as Matt, and ends up with sort of a similar story. Obviously, you know, not the same sort of origins and everything else, but yeah, I mean, he ends up emulating Matt in almost every way you reasonably could, to include, like you said, becoming, you know, the horn sounder, which I thought was a good arc for both of them.
I agree. Now we have Prince of the Ravens, which of course is the title that he takes on,
Mm-hmm.
I think as her consort, even at first, before they get married. So I didn't have a lot that I really wanted to go into here. Um, and simply a lot of that's because I really don't like Tuon's character very much. And I don't know, it's just really weird to me that Matt actually falls in love with her. But that could also be, quite honestly, I love Matt. And so maybe I'm just jealous of Tuon. I don't know. So it could be. But so this is just representative, of course, of their relationship and that entire arc. And regretfully, that we're not actually going to get to see continue that I'm aware of, with the Sean Chan and, their world and all of that. That would have been really fun to see. But
Yeah.
and of course, I just wanted to include, the iconic Jack of the Shadows from the Band of the Red Hand, because we just can't talk about Matt and the band without having that. And I didn't want to really delve into the ending of the book too much,
Okay.
but I will say that I was let down or disappointed a little bit by the scene where he defeats Mashadar. I know, we all know, I think that Sanderson had some difficulty, with Matt's character. I mean, I still think he did an absolutely tremendous job. I'm, not saying anything bad about that, but I thought it was a little anticlimactic. So I don't know. I just thought I would throw that out there. But yeah, basically that's what I had about Matt and his arc. And then I think we were just going to go into a real quick overview here of the way the Wheel of Time show has actually treated Matt's arc that we just talked about and the damage that it's really done to his character in the first season and how it'll affect further seasons. All right. So, of course, now we have how the show treats Matt.
So this is the part
Uh,
that we're obviously fellow white cloaks here, right? So this is where it gets interesting, because we've just been talking about how much we really love Matt's character, his arc. Agree to some elements that Sanderson may not have finished it quite as well as some of us might have wanted. But I'll never throw shade at Sanderson for doing really excellent work to finish a series that I don't think there were authors lined up around the block there to finish some other author's work instead of doing their own, especially not authors of his quality. So shout out to him for the great work that he did do. But then we get to the current adaptation of Matt of the Wheel of Time. And I think you have a few things here to say, right? So hit me with it.
all right. So first off, and we've actually addressed this, I think, almost ad nauseum in some of our rewatches. But basically, the show is treating Matt as a thief. So I just pulled out, a couple of very pertinent areas in which they did so. On the right, we have the part where he is pawning off Dana's bracelet and also showing the fact that he's a horrible negotiator to begin with. I
Yep.
think they started at 3 marks and went down to what, half a mark for 3 paper lanterns or something in the show.
Yep.
And then over on the left is from an episode that you guys haven't gotten to yet in your rewatches. But, this is where he is stealing from the dead Io body. And yeah, I can barely even say anything about that without just getting really angry. And it's also, you can't see it very well in that screenshot, but I believe that is supposed to be a stone dog. So obviously the show they don't know what they're doing with his character. He's not a thief. He stole a pie and released a badger on the green. These are not the same thing.
The
So
the
right off
thing
the
that I
bat,
always go to is that line from Super Troopers, right? Where it's, you know, our shenanigans are cheeky and fun. His are cruel and tragic, which makes them not really shenanigans at all. and
exactly.
and that's Matt. In the book, Matt's shenanigans are cheeky and fun, and he offsets it with a lot of really good character attributes. In the show, his roguish nature is shown by him being a legit thief. And the only thing that I can think of, and we've talked about this before, the difference between sort of small town and city, and the fact that the showrunners, I think, just don't know what it is to live in a small town, don't know what it is to have sort of a rural community, and sort of the values that I think go along with that. Those are not the same thing. Like you couldn't live in Emmons Field, a real world version of Emmons Field, and be somebody who steals from people, especially not on enough of an ongoing basis where like the peddler knows that you're the thief in the town. Like if Paddon Fane knows that you pawn him stolen goods every year, everybody else knows, and like you'd be run out of town on a rail, right? The show really swing and miss here. I think this is a great point to bring up.
Okay, so the next thing that really disturbs me about the show is the role models. Prior I was talking about how I think the role models that Matt has, provide such a base for his character, and as you brought up, humility and all of that. So what do we get in the show? And I had to pick this screenshot because I wanted to make Dane quiver. And I get it, bringing in, and we've discussed this too, bringing in the modern cuss words and not giving us in-world language, it just breaks immersion completely. So anyways, that's kind of
I
why I picked particular slide. But so here are the show role models in comparison to the book role models. What do we have? We have his mother, who is a drunkard or an alcoholic, and we have his father, the prick, who is out obviously, trying to seduce younger women, not good role models at all. So what does that going to do for Matt's arc in the future? Because if they're trying to make this into a quote unquote some type of a redemption arc, where he's, had this kind of upbringing, but he's not going to let that affect him, or he overcomes it or whatever. Matt's arc is not a redemption arc. So the other couple of points that I wanted to make about the role model situation is, Natty obviously psychologically and emotionally abuses Matt, saying he's going to turn out to be just like his father. They neglect and treat the other, the two girls abominably. And I did come across a theory or an excuse or whatever you want to call it, that perhaps they were trying to set it up this way because they need to condense the show, right? Which I get, but that they wanted to take this direction because it would emphasize that he cared for his sisters, right? He didn't have good parents, but they do show him caring and wanting to save his sisters. And then later on, we have that episode where, he's got the doll, the Birgitta doll, and obviously thinking about his sisters, and that they were trying to set that up because it would show him caring in that aspect, but that would emphasize his deterioration under the influence of the dagger. And all I can say about that is they failed miserably if that was their attempt.
Yeah, the only thing I can say about this, I think you made a lot of good points, is that to the extent that they wanted to show some sort of redeeming quality to his character because he cared for his sisters, I mean, what a ridiculously low threshold of like human decency to like, oh, you mean you care for your literal flesh and blood family? Like, okay. You care for children, the literal defenseless people. Okay. So you are a person with 23 chromosomes. That's basically what we've established for you. Congratulations. So that was super weak when you compare it to what we know about him from the books, which is this is the guy who jumped into a river to save somebody who, he didn't really necessarily even know that well, risked himself, and it turned out that the person didn't actually need saving. And everyone made fun of him for, a long time about how he, made such a fool of himself jumping into this river after someone. And then the next time that he sees somebody in a river seemingly drowning, he immediately jumps into the river to save him again, undeterred by the fact that people made fun of him for doing it last time. And the second time, the person actually was in distress, and he actually rescued them, saved their life. And nobody made fun of him again after that because they realized that, like, wow, this guy was willing to do the same thing again, to risk even more ridicule to save somebody. That's some heart, some heroic, sort of attitude and mentality. So they had that available to him. They decided to give him instead the lowest possible threshold of human decency, which is really fantastic. I guess maybe the people involved in making this show, maybe they don't care about their siblings and children, and so they think that, wow, what an honorable person. And the other sort of self-own that I'll give them here as the showrunners is, in sort of ruining every kind of male and possible male role model in the show, it actually highlighted the critical importance of having positive male role models, because they show us that Matt is basically trash. He's a thief. That he doesn't do anything he's supposed to do. He's the darkness inside him and all this kind of stuff, right? And where does that come from? Oh, it comes from the fact that he has a dirtbag and an absentee father. Like, I mean, I could have told you that that's what happens when you raise someone in that environment. I'm just surprised to see that they created that through line of showing that, having good, strong father figures is actually important. So good for them. Good for them on that.
Okay, I think you're giving them too much credit for them actually realizing that.
Oh, no. I give them no credit. That's why I said a self-own.
Okay.
I give them no credit for intentionally doing that. I'm just saying that, man, even trying their hardest to ruin everything, they actually, like, hey, that's you can't knowingly make everything wrong, because at a certain point, like, basic things like gravity and the importance of father figures, like, has to inject itself into your work.
Okay. All right. Agreed. 100%. And before we go to the next slide, we don't have too much more here. I did also want to just mention the show has also not provided us, that I can remember, any indication that Matt has any true fighting skills, like with the bow or with a staff or being able to track. Nothing. So that's kind of like, well,
true. Almost the least of their sins.
Yeah, exactly. But it's important to his arc,
his arc in the show. His arc in the
and
show is he's gonna get memories injected into his head about being a really good baker. He's gonna make lots of cakes and baked goods, cupcakes.
Oh wait, no.
So
You know what we're gonna get? Oh my God, I just thought of this. Okay, so a quick little tangent. I believe that the showrunner actually worked on Chuck, which the first 2 or 3 seasons of that are some of my favorite television.
he was not
Okay, they
involved in the
really
first
are.
couple seasons, just to be clear.
I know. That's probably why I like those so much. However, you just made me realize that they're going to inject the memories into Matt, right? And it's going to be like the intersect from Chuck. Look, I can do.
The only part of Matt's character that Raginor likes is that he can use the word intersectionality when describing what Matt's doing.
Oh my God. Okay.
All right, let's
we gotta move along. All right. So okay, so the next one is the old tongue, and isn't that just a lovely picture? Oh my God.
Man, gross.
Okay, which is why it was intentionally chosen. And I do have a few things obviously to say about this. And let's start off with the old tongue. All right. So in the books, when Matt was healed by the Eyes to Die, and separated from the dagger, I think that is, if not the first time, it's not the first time, because I'll mention that too here in a sec. But when they're actually doing that, he does not yet have the memories, okay, of, all the military commanders and picking up old tongue dialects from that. But during that healing, he is yelling and cursing at them in the old tongue. Okay. So here, where we have Moraine instead of the Eyes to Die, no old tongue whatsoever. I believe the first time when he actually spoke it was a battle cry before, when they were being chased by the Trollocs, before Shadar Logoth.
Mhm.
And that was also some awesome foreshadowing of his hanging. You
Yep.
know, when
The
he
catchpole
almost
around his neck.
basically,
Yeah.
yep, exactly. Um, but, so he yelled out in Old Tongue there. Then we have where it should have happened here when he's being separated from the dagger. So there's absolutely none of that. So since they have none of that, well, probably they'll have him speaking Old Tongue later in the show, possibly, maybe not, don't know. But even if they do, I think because they haven't done that, we really lost a piece of subtlety and mystery that kind of goes all the way throughout his story. And also, a lot of fan theories are kind of based on that. There's a lot of interesting things around that the show just completely has skipped. Okay. Um, Also, you mentioned earlier, the darkness within. That is probably the thing that creates such rage in me about the show when I actually heard that line. God, it pissed me off so much because, as we've said, that is not who Matt is. What this really reminds me of is I think we know that Jordan kind of modeled this after Lord of the Rings, because that's what he was asked to do when he wrote Eye of the World. So, what this reminds me of is if we had a Lord of the Rings where the ring was feeding off the darkness in Frodo, and that wouldn't work. If that was the case, he would have been corrupted like immediately. Everything would have been lost. So I'm looking at what they've done with Matt and this darkness within and going, how the fuck are they going to fix that? So there's my there's my little rant about that part.
Easy answer. They're not. Okay.
Yeah, I know. All right. So now we'll just move on to the very last piece here. So this is about loyal friend. Earlier, I talked about how one of the important pieces of Matt's arc or his character is what a loyal friend he is.
Gosh, that I'm only going to need
And
one ticket. What is that even? Where is that even from in the show?
okay, so I think that is episode 3. That is when they're at the tavern, the same time that he steals from the Aiel. And this is when he's talking to the bartender,
Yep.
and they're talking about how much money he needs to put together so that he can get back home, which he says is Baerlon.
I had completely gotten that out of my memory. Yeah, so he was going to abandon Rand. So a complete 180 out from what we saw in the book. Nice. Okay.
Exactly. And then, of course, the classic screenshot from the very end where he abandons them outside the Waygate. Now, we know the excuse that they have for this. The Barney Harris had left the show for whatever reason. So he wouldn't be able to be in further episodes. But we all know this could have been handled so differently. And that book, Matt, would never have abandoned his friends. And it also makes him look like a coward.
Yeah,
Completely
I
untrue.
don't understand this at all. I think that they had such an easy and obvious out here, which is just make it so that they had Perrin laid up sick from getting healed for a couple scratches on his back. They could have easily just said that Matt was too unwell. Like, nope, after being cured of the dagger, like, no, he couldn't possibly move. He was stuck in the White Tower for recuperation. And sure, it wouldn't have been true to the books, but like they could have, condensing timelines, they could have picked up with him recovering from his healing in Tarvalon or Tarvalon, however you want to pronounce it. They could have picked that up, and instead they did this absolute massacre of his character. Like you said, makes him a coward. We have no idea where he is after this. Like, so are we to believe that he just hangs around? So he abandons them and doesn't go back home to the Two Rivers and just, see a peace? Like, wherever we see him in season 2, I guarantee you it's going to make zero freaking sense.
Well, I think they had one shot And I don't remember which episode it was, and it was obviously something that, they pulled out of that they had shot earlier of him looking up at the White Tower. There was just one really
which
quick
which
little
tells us
clip of
nothing
that.
other than that
I exactly.
he's in Tarvalon for some reason. But I mean, this is in theory the Ogier Grove, which we know is actually on the island. Not that it looks like it at all in the show. So I mean, who the heck knows what they were thinking with that? I mean, there's a theory that that was him stealing back the dagger to give it to Padden Fane or something
Right.
like that, which if that's what they meant to portray, they did a terrible job of it, and it's a terrible idea. So like, 0 of 10, bad impulse, bad execution. If that's not what they intended, who the heck knows? I mean, at this point, they get more things right unintentionally than they do intentionally, I think, and those are few enough between. So
Yeah, I just don't see how it's at all possible to save his character in the show. I mean, his actual character and character arc. Yeah. I'm just terribly sad and angry about that.
agreed. Okay, well, I think we've kind of gotten to the end of the stuff that you had put together, Tryp. Just want to say a lot of good points. I appreciate all the research and work that you went in or you put into this. Definitely shows. I know you said before we started filming this that you had sort of an overall question that you wanted to pose to me. So, ladies first, I'll let you go first.
Okay, thanks, Pips. All right, so my question has to do with the memories that Matt receives from countless military leaders. So, and I'm not even sure how I would answer this question. So, this really is a question for you. Does it fundamentally change who Matt is when he's given those memories? Not who he is or how he appears to others, but who he is to himself. And if so, how does it change him? Or is it more that he's just utilizing those memories as a skill? And kind of as an example, I was thinking about it, and all three of the boys end up with voices of some type in their heads. So we have Matt with memories, we have Rand, of course, with Luz Theron, and then we have Perrin with the Wolf Brothers.
Oh man, I don't want to fixate on your accent here, but can you say the Wolf Brothers?
Hey, don't you dare call me Idaho. Just don't.
Was
Wolf.
was that a woof, like a dog, like a woof woof?
You know what? Bite me.
You'd like that. You'd like that too much, Tryp. Okay, good. All right. Well, um, so good question. I think you're making a fair point about all three of the characters really get sort of a voice that kind of drives them. They have their own sort of things going on. I think to answer your question though, no. I don't think it fundamentally changes the character, and I think the reason I say that is the word fundamental in your question, right? So obviously all of the characters are changed by their particular driving voice, mission experience, all of the stuff that kind of ties in there. But I think we still see the character of Matt, his fundamental character. I don't think we actually see that substantially changed. And the way that the evidence that I would give of that is two specific things. And I swear I didn't prepare these in advance. This is just shooting from the hip right here. First time I've even formulated these thoughts. So, Matt pulling the girl's bacon out of the fire in Tyr, and Matt in Abu Dar, I think really Matt first in Saladar, and then in Abu Dar. I think that those two stories, so Matt going on a journey to, find the women and rescue them from some sort of perceived threat with no real, thoughts of glory or, value to himself or anything like that. It was really just because it was the right thing to do and because they were women, and that's who he was, right? And then you see him going to Saladar, and first he thinks that Egwene is being used. He thinks she's being manipulated. She's a puppet so that she can get executed instead of the the actual people who are responsible for the Aes Sedai sort of insurrection. At least that's how I recall that sort of scene in Saladar. And then she puts him sort of between a rock and a hard place where his job is to protect Elaine. And she sends Elaine on a mission to Abu Dar, and Matt finds himself having to go to Abu Dar, and he, really is Elaine and Nynaeve's sort of errand boy throughout the time at Abu Dar, and he's disgruntled about it, but he's doing all of the things, and, sure, he has his personal things going on there. He's not, following them around like a puppy, but you see the same sort of will to put himself into harm's way in order to protect his wards as he maybe sees them, the people he's responsible for their safety. So he goes up against Forsaken and Black Aja in Tyr, and he goes against a flippin' golem in Abu Dar, plus potentially Forsaken and Black Aja and Dark Friends and the Seanchan and all of it, right? So yeah, I would say fundamentally I don't think he's changed.
Okay. I think those are good points. I just really kind of wonder about that. But
you can
now
you can tell me that's 2 points for Pips. You can give it to me.
Now, why would that be 2 points?
Because I already got 1 point.
2 examples.
No, I already got 1 point earlier in this whole thing.
Oh, okay, but we weren't arguing. Remember, this was simply a question.
But you sounded like you wanted to disagree a little bit, but then agreed.
No.
You sounded like your first impulse was to disagree and then agree. I think at least a half point. I think at least 1.5 points for Pips.
Okay. All right. Just because Pips is so pretty.
That's true.
You can have a half point.
That's
Yes.
true. It's I use mane and tail shampoo. It's good stuff.
Yeah, but we need to get you some pink ribbons.
No, that's not my style. All right.
All right. But, and I know you have a question for me, but a couple of things I did not mention earlier that were kind of on my list.
Okay.
Wasn't Abu Dar where Elaine started acting very differently towards Matt because Avienda told her she had toe? Because they had treated him so poorly after Tyr when he rescued them.
So I'm actually going to say that yes, that is when Elaine and Nynaeve, to a certain extent, started acting differently. I won't say better. They started acting a little differently. The question is, now that I'm thinking, so you say Avienda said this. I don't actually think it was Avienda. I think that was actually your namesake. I think Brigida.
Oh, that's right.
I think Brigida told them
right.
because it's actually that scene where like Matt, again, humble Matt, Brigida actually like has to drag the details out of him essentially. And he keeps on like, oh, it was only, the Stone of Tyr. And she was like, wait a second. You broke into the Stone of Tyr to get these girls. And it's like, yeah, but there were only like a couple Black Aja sisters and like they were unconscious practically anyway. And she was like, wait a second. You went into the Stone of Tyr with Black Aja there. And it's like, and a Forsaken. And she was like, wait a second. And then you see the scene where she practically goes and like grabs Elaine and Nynaeve by the ear and is like, the two of you have some splaining to do.
How could I forget that that was my namesake? Oh my god.
I think that's at least another half point for Pips.
Okay, no. No. You already gotten away with way too much.
And with that, I think that we've reached the end of this very long White Cloaks short. And all I want to say, hey, it's been a real pleasure having the conversation. I again really do appreciate all the work that you put into this. It really shows. You've been a great member of the subreddit and the Discord, and really glad to have you on. Looking forward to having you on again for the rewatches. You have any last minute saved comments?
No. Just thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun to put together and a lot of fun to talk about.
Well, that's all we got then. And for those of you watching, go ahead and comment in the comment box whether or not I got a full 2 points or just a 1.5. I think a full 2. And that's all we got. Thanks for watching.